15 is upon us. I know we have a couple of items, so just make sure that we are able to get through both of those. Is it matter with? Okay, very good. So this is a report for the Caldwell Police Department allocation model. So with that, we'll turn it over to Deputy Chief at this time.
Yeah, Mayor, council members, thank you for your time tonight. We've already sent out the police allocation model for you guys to take a look at, but tonight we're actually going to have Amy Herrig. She's the one who conducted the police allocation model for us. She's also done probably 3 or 4 other police allocation models for other agencies here in the Valley. So she's a wealth of knowledge, and she's just going to give you kind of a brief oversight of what the report says. So, Chief, you got something? No. Okay. This is Amy.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, thank you.
You bet.
So I've had a private consulting firm for about 10 years, and my background is in research, and I've done a lot of work in the Valley on human resource type studies, particularly staffing studies, because they seem to be sort of a niche that a lot of people don't have resources to be able to put towards that. And so policing is one of the ones that is a big area where I've worked in. Let's see if we're doing. Okay. I skipped one. So patrol and traffic, there's actually a lot of studies that have been out there. It's been a source of research for decades. And one of the ones that was established early on in the late 80s and early 90s is the Police Allocation Model, or the PAM. It was established by the National Highway Transportation Group, and it was built with 8 to 12 original agencies. Boise was one of them, so it has a connection to the Treasure Valley. It is going to provide the number of officers required to deliver patrol and traffic services in Caldwell based on a number of factors. It does not calculate how many specialty teams you would need or administrators, just patrol and traffic, so your first responders. And it's based on workload requirements, performance objectives, personnel policies, and roadway characteristics. It's a nice combination of data and performance goals for the agency. It's a time-based model, so really what it's doing is it's balancing reactive work with proactive work. So your reactive, your crashes and citizen calls for service, with your proactive officer-initiated contacts. It's also building in time for uncommitted patrol and administrative duties. It's calculating how much time it takes for officers to complete all of these duties within Caldwell, looks at how much time officers have in the field, and then calculates how many you need. Sounds simple. I wanted to go through and show you all of the model inputs it includes. There are a lot of them. It's a very robust model. And we did an analysis for right now, so how many officers you should have now given your workload, and then for 5 years out, how many you should have based on some workload projections. So the operations data that's included in the model is the shift length, the work week, which are based on current, the officers supervised per sergeant, so there's that span of control in there. That is a choice of the police department, whether they want 6, 8, 5, based on your operations. And then the amount of time that sergeants are actually going to spend on supervisory duties versus taking calls themselves. So 8 is a relatively high span of control, but with only 20% of their time dedicated to patrol duties, it's a nice balance. And then there's some officer time information that comes in there. The average number of on-duty time spent on non-patrol duties. This includes training and court. So the officers are working, they're on duty, but they're not available to take calls. Average paid time off per officers per year. This is any of their leave time. And then an average comp or overtime expectation that you would want. Some agencies project for 0 overtime, but really it's 3 to 4% is sort of realistic. So this is an 83 is a 4%. I want to highlight in on the officer time off just to show you a little bit. This is actually from your officer data. It's from personnel data from the payroll for 32 officers during a time period. And what this is showing you is officers are contracted for 80 hours per year. That's 40 hours per week, 52 weeks per year. And if you look at their actual time worked, you get base hours of 1,873, 207, and this is an average per officer per year, 207 hours of leave time, and then 225 of overtime. This, compared to the other agencies that we've looked at in the Valley, and I've worked with PAM models for Boise, Meridian, Nampa, and the Ada County Sheriff's Office, your guys are working a lot. Just to give you an example. The base hours in the other agencies ranged from 1,580 to 1,680. There was one that was at 1,800, but you guys are way up. So your officers are working quite a lot. Time off for other agencies, the range is 370 to 400 off. You guys are at 200. One agency was at 280, so there is some variation in there. And then overtime, it ranged from 150 to 270 for others, but no one except you guys has overtime that's greater than the officer time off. Pretty much if the agency that had 275 hours of overtime also had 400 hours of leave per officer per year. So your guys, this data, real data, it's yours, shows that your guys are really working a lot. That's foreshadowing how many officers is coming. The next information that comes in addition to operations is roadway data. Roadway data is important for response and visibility. So you want to be able to respond quickly to calls, to be available, to be visible in the neighborhood. So it's based on actual roadway miles for now in a 5-year forecast, a patrol interval performance objective. For this, like a highway or an arterial, the performance objective is to have an officer pass by 5 times per shift. So every 2 hours, you have an officer hit a part on a highway. And for local roads, so your neighborhoods, it's once per week. So you want this essentially having an officer patrol each neighborhood once a week in your community. These are very consistent with the model inputs from the other agencies in the Treasure Valley, very consistent with community policing operations in general. And then the average speed that you can patrol at during all times of year. And so if arterials, if they tend to be 55 miles per hour, you're really only ever going to get 35, 25, and then 15 through neighborhoods. Just to highlight on the roadway per miles to show you the growth in Caldwell. We have actual data from 5 years ago, and then current data from 2024, and what we did is just project it out based on the same rate of growth of the last 5 years. You can see the highways and the arterials and the collectors growing at a rate of about 16 to 17, and those local roads, which are all your neighborhoods going in, growing at a rate of 25%. So that's where we got the trend for the 5 years. I'm very bad with this clicker. The next is workload data. This is real data based on the computer-aided dispatch. It's your CAD data. It's mostly including the reactive work, so your crashes and your citizen-initiated calls for service. And then there's a performance goal for how much proactive work you want your officers to be able to do. So for crashes, this is your number per year is a little less than 2,000, but since it's a time-based model, it really matters how much time you spend on those. And the average time on call, which does include report writing for the PAM, is a little over almost 2 hours, 1 hour and 40 minutes per call per crash. The non-preemptible is put in the model if you're at a call, this goes to officer availability, that if another emergency call came up, would an officer on this call be able to leave, or would they have to stay and complete the call first? So crashes are considered 100% non-preemptible. You have to have one officer there until they're completed. Citizen-initiated calls for service, 21,000, take a little less time. There's a bigger variety of 51 minutes, and the non-preemptible are based on priority, so 86. Officer-initiated performance goal is based on the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I'll show you that in a minute. And 2 officer patrols is basically an adjustment for field training officers. So we have 2 officers in a vehicle that actually acts just like one, so there's an adjustment for that. So just to show you the growth in the last few years, this is just crashes, total incidents on the left, and the time on the calls. You can see since 2021, there was about 1,700 crashes, and it jumped to almost 1,900 projected for this year. That's pretty flat. That's not a huge increase. But if you look at the time spent on the calls, there's been an average annual increase of 8.7. So that's quite a big jump. And that can be the calls are more complex. They involve more individuals, but the time has definitely gone up on that. Very similar for citizen-initiated calls for service. You can see 18,000 to about 19.5 total number, pretty flat with a high year, but then the average annual increase on the amount of time spent on those is going up 8.2%. One additional thing on this performance goal for proactivity, this is what I was saying is the IACP recommendation, is in community policing organizations is to have, the goal is to have an officer spend 20 minutes of their time on administrative work, 20 minutes on reactive work, and have 20 minutes for proactive work. So there's sort of a one-to-one balance of your proactive and your reactive work. If you look at Caldwell PD's actual time based on CAD data, you're more like 3-to-1 balance of reactive to proactive. That's pretty much telling me that officers don't have a lot of time to be able to do the proactive community contacts. They're spending the majority of their time responding to calls. So these 20+ workload roadway performance model inputs go into multiple series of calculations. Again, sometimes it looks like a black box, but it's calculating how much time it takes, how much time officers had, so how much do you need? And for Caldwell, it is recommending 87 officers for just patrol and traffic within the next 5 years. Caldwell currently has 50 authorized positions, so that's 30 more officers right now, including 3 sergeants and 27 corporals and officers, and another 7 in the next 5 years. Because the growth projection doesn't add that many more, it's really kind of indicative of being lagging from where you should be based on the model. Might sound big, but if you look at other models that do staffing, they're coming out with a very similar 30+ recommendation. If you look at the officers per 1,000, which is based basically on just a comparison to a state average, it's saying that in 5 years you're going to need 83 officers just for patrol and traffic. So that's 33 more. The IACP COPS is another workload-based model. It has about half the inputs of the PAM, so it's a little bit more simplistic, also saying 32 in the next 5 years. So really, most of the staffing models that you would use that use real data, your data, are coming out to be the 30+ range. Without additional staffing, likely what you will see is you'll continue to have high use of comp and overtime. It's not just going to be your patrol and traffic teams, it'll probably be your specialty teams too if they have to cover patrol shifts. You're going to see some less uncommitted patrol time and officer accessibility. That can result in longer response times or inability to respond to some calls. The neighborhoods are not going to see your officers in there. Going to be longer waits on the highways, and reduced proactive policing contacts. Your officers are going to be going to the crashes and citizen calls. They're not going to have time for the proactive stuff. So that is all I have. I'm available for questions or turn it over to the chief.
Chief, anything you want to say before we jump? I'm sure we're going to have some questions. So.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I just want to say thank you very much to Dr. Herrig. Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, great information. I'd just jump in with a couple. So just to clarify, because it showed, so the number was being shown on there was patrol. So
Yes, sir.
50, those 50 officers, that's patrol and
Those are folks in a police car that can respond to an emergency at any given time of the day.
So it wouldn't include like detectives,
Correct.
obviously administrative, things like
Correct.
that. So I know, because I saw the fifth, I'm like, I thought we were like closer to 80, because that would include, 80 would include everybody.
Yeah, we have about
This is
110
just-
total in the whole department, but 50 are actually working patrol.
And to-
So,
And to get to where we really need to be by this data, we should have 80 working just patrol.
Correct.
On that, correct on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Maybe one more question before we jump in with the council is, I apologize, are you from here, from this area, or
Yes, I
from the
live.
Treasure Valley?
Yes, I live in the Treasure Valley.
So the question I kind of posed to the chief earlier was, as we try to move and get more officers, obviously budget constraints are there, and there's House Bill 389 that limits how much we can grow every year. Do you know much on that, and does that, I mean, has other cities dealt with that, tried to increase their police force or other, because obviously we know police is pretty much based off of property tax, and where we have that cap of that 8% due to House Bill 389, is that gonna limit us to how many officers we could add, even if we wanted to in any given point? Do you know much on that, or?
I do not know much about that specifically. Okay, but I do know that each of the city councils and city has responded in a different way to the number of officers recommended by the model. Some of them were able to build additional staffing relatively quickly. Some had a graduated plan, and for a few years, you know, it's been very difficult to hire, so it put a pause on it. Hopefully that will change. So really, it's just providing information to be able to give you guys the best data you can to make decisions.
Yeah, great data, except you showed us leading in all the categories we don't want to be leading in, but it was great data. Questions from council? Councilor Allgood.
Well, I've been to week-long classes that didn't explain it as well as you did.
Oh,
You did a wonderful job. Have you seen agencies change their schedule? Is there an optimum schedule to meet demands? Have you seen that across the board at all?
not specifically in response to the PAM model saying you need some more officers. They have changed their scheduling when they've looked at the layout of the calls and when they occur. As I know at another agency, they added two swing shifts instead of just having one to make sure they had appropriate coverage for high volume. But not necessarily specifically in response to needing more officers.
It didn't relate to number of officers, just when calls were arriving.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from any council members? Councilor Stoddard.
Mr. Mayor, when you talk to these other cities, other than, again, House Bill 389, what the mayor mentioned, it stymies our ability to add what we need. Do any of the other cities have a remedy for that you've talked to?
No, that bill is new, right, within the last year?
Yeah.
Yes. Boise and Meridian and Ada County Sheriffs were completed over the last 5 years, so they didn't have that in the way. And the more recent ones for this year, yeah, you guys are sort of the first ones.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, very good. Thank you
Thank
again
you.
so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Anything else, Chief?
thank you for your time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, next on, let's see if I can get back to our list was a results of the 2021-2022 revenue audit. Are you doing this, Freeland, or is Rochelle? Oh, there she is. Very good. Thank you, Rochelle. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. So I am here to present the 22-21 revenue audit that was completed by Eide Bailey. And let me just, I've never used this. I'm going to start off by giving a summary of all revenue for the city so that you guys can have an understanding of what it is that we bring in and some graphs and some percentages. And then I'm going to go into the summary and the findings and some things that we're still working on as a city to kind of, in regards to some recommendations that were made. Oh, I can see it, okay. Oh, over here, okay. There's a graph right here. Okay. So on this page, it kind of talks about the fiscal year '22 total revenues and the fiscal year '21 total revenues. And what we focused on were the fee-based revenues that the city has, because those are the ones that are subject to the most volatility in internal staffing processes, as far as making sure they're updated, making sure the systems have what they need in them. A lot of these other ones, I'd be more than happy to answer questions for you if you have, but property tax is 12 checks a year from the county, so it's really easy to audit and validate that. We have grant revenue that we get. Intergovernmental is your sales tax and some other governmental revenue that we receive, and then franchise fees. All of those are high in dollar amounts to our government funds, but not a lot of activity, I guess you could say, going on to receive those funds. It's usually either a monthly check, quarterly check, and whatnot. And so those amounts are large in amount, but very easy to validate and identify for the auditors. So we didn't focus on those revenue types. So in this page here for fiscal year 2022, it has two buckets. One is charges for services, which it shows is at 48%, and then it has licensing and permits, which is at 5%. Those two categories for both years are the fee-based revenue. License and permits is obviously in our building, planning and zoning, engineering, review fees, and those kinds of things, permits that we issue. The charges for services are mostly enterprise funds. So out of the charges for services, 48% of the city's revenue is charges for services. 73% of that is for enterprise funds. It's water, sewer, irrigation, sanitation, and those kinds of fees. And so there's not a lot left that goes toward the other revenue sources. So when we looked at this inclusively, we decided to, out of these fees, we said, okay, if there's anything less than 3% of the overall revenue in these fee revenue sources, we were going to leave those to be audited internally, because any variances that would have been found would have likely costed more to audit than the variance itself that may have occurred from any kind of error that was made. So there were some departments that fell into that category. I'll review those in a minute, and I'm going to first review the ones that we actually audited with iBailey and tell you the results from those. On the next, let's see. Okay, so then we break down license and permits, and this is just more for information for you. Within that 5% for 22 and the 4% for 21 of license and permit revenue, these next two slides just kind of identify what types of permit revenue are within that permit category. So you have electrical permits, plumbing permits, engineering, mechanical, certain building permits, the clerks. So there's some very small amount of miscellaneous fire permits that we issue, and things like that. Any questions on that before I go further into each department and the summary of the findings? No? Okay. So the first, I'm just going to go in, it's kind of alphabetical order. The first one was Caldwell Event Center. They looked at the overall revenue for that. They compared that to the increases that were approved by council. They identified that they were in line with the increases that were approved, and they recommended making some more processes automated because it's all manual entry, and so we have already started initiating a process that's not such manual calculation so that we can validate that those calculations are being done appropriately. Other than that, they identified that no further testing was necessary in that category, other than to make the process of collecting the fees more automated so we could have a dual check in place. Cemetery fees were also approved in line with the ordinances, and so no further testing again was determined necessary on that. Again, they did recommend that we make those processes more automated so that we can have a double check and have somebody reviewing those fees as they come into the city to validate that they are reviewed and being charged appropriately. The city clerk fees, they showed that uncollected fees of $83.40 was found for the culmination of the 2 years, and they, that amount being very small, just recommended, again, making processes more automated. A lot of the fee processes in the city before were done manually with fee sheets, where the fee sheet was updated by the department annually, and then the calculation was done manually and then put into the accounting software. So for a lot of these recommendations they made, we have created the individual fee within our accounting software with the fee rate listed, so that when somebody goes in to enter the fee, the rate automatically pops up, and they can identify any errors or discrepancies at the time of entry. And finance can also double check to see if there's any variances or discrepancies. Total uncollected fees for golf showed about $3,924. Most of these variances were held in green fees and cart rentals. Again, they offered to make a recommendation to perform more reconciliations. We use ForUp, which is a golf software for our point-of-sale software system, to bring in all the fees for that. And so they identified that doing monthly and quarterly reconciliations to make sure that the amounts getting entered are entered appropriately, and then also getting reporting from that system to validate that the fees have been entered correctly and timely. Library fees were in line with the approved increases. No further testing was needed on that. They did, again, make recommendation to automate those processes. Planning and zoning, the fees collected, they over-collected some fees on that one of $1,627. Again, no further testing was done, and automation. I think in the last year, planning and zoning has also tried diligently to make that process more automated. I think their fees are now being processed in CitizenServe, whereas prior, during 22 and 21, they were not calculating them through that program. They were doing it manually. So I think that in this last year, they had already started to create that process automatically when we entered into this audit for the 24 fiscal year. Park impact fees was probably the biggest impact. As we know, that's probably what caused the initiation of this audit, to kind of make sure we were doing what we needed to do as a city. They found $288,192 of uncollected fees. It was due to an error. We increased the fees in December of 2021. And communication was not made to update the program and software used, and so we did not collect the appropriate amount during 22 and 21, and that's the total result from that audit. Sewer and water both, we use our Springbrook accounting software to utilize billing for usage charges and connection fees in relation to these two enterprise funds, and we were able to go back and validate that those fees had been appropriately increased. The way the system is set up, you create a fee each year, and it contains the history within that for us to be able to go back and audit. And so we were able to go back and look at that and ensure that all those fees were updated according to the resolutions that were passed. So no further testing and no recommendations were made on that. The irrigation, they did find some inconsistencies between what was charged, but they found that that was related to annexation fees, which are kind of a prorated fee charged to new development coming in mid-year. That's the initial bringing on of the irrigation, and then after that, each individual homeowner gets an account and then is billed annually thereafter. They did recommend that our irrigation billing be automated. It is currently a manual process on an Excel spreadsheet, and it is very complicated. The city would like to move forward with finding a program that is catered to irrigation that can possibly automate some of this calculation. Right now, there's just a lot of room for error in that. It is going to be double checked by finance moving forward annually, but they did say that that was kind of an issue as to you have a lot of accounts and a lot of calculations going into a manual spreadsheet. And so that recommendation to make it more automated we will be looking at further to see what we can do to make that process better. The building permit fees were in line with the approved increases. There were some inconsistencies from the point-of-sale software that they use, Citizen Serve, but we were able to validate those. And they recommended doing reconciliations as well on that one. That's why they weren't tying out, was because we do adjustments sometimes after we've issued it, whether it's issue a refund or something like that. And so all of the variances they found there, we were able to validate and identify that they were for adjustments that were done. The departments that we decided to audit internally that fell below the 3% threshold were airport, engineering, finance, fire, police, park and recreation, cemetery, and street light fees. I did perform the fire impact and police impact internal audit fee, as the impact fees were the highlight of what presented this audit, and I figured that that would be knowledge that you guys would want to know. Seeing that we were delayed in increasing the fees during December 2021 when that increase took effect, it did show that in fire impact fees, we had uncollected revenue of $121,000, and in police impact fees, we had uncollected revenue of $21,000, both of which were in the fiscal year 22. Fiscal year 21 was charging the appropriate fees, as the error that caused this didn't happen until the increase that was approved in December of 2021. So we were already quarter way into fiscal year 22 before the error was made. We have already started processes on all of these smaller funds and some of the other ones to make fees more automated. Parks and Recreation uses a point-of-sale software that we still need to dive into and make sure, and get reporting data out of it to ensure that we are charging the correct fees on the resolution. Cemeteries fees have all been automated, so when they're put into our accounting software now, the fee is auto-populated and it's double-checked by finance. Streetlight fees is done through Springbrook, and that has already somewhat been validated, just like the other enterprise fees. We can go in and see that that has been appropriately completed over the last several years. Engineering fees, again, is in Citizen Serve, and so we still have yet to look at that, but from a glance and the reporting that I could get, I saw very small variances. I wasn't able to validate the variances yet, but my assumption is that those are also due to adjustments, just like the building permit fees that are done not in the point-of-sale software, but in our accounting software. Airports fees are a little different. They're mostly lease-related, so you can't really compare increases annually to a direct relation to increase in revenue, because some of the leases don't increase for 5 years or 7 years, depending on the lease agreement and the stipulations within the lease. And so that one, we did internally audit last year. We looked at every single lease last year and recalculated it from the beginning of the lease to the end of 2023. During that audit, we did find that an overcalculation of fees of approximately $10,000. We, at that time, did issue credits to the accounts of the leaseholders, and it was applied to the following year's lease. That is what I have here for you tonight as the result of that audit, and with that, I'll stand for questions.
Very good. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Any questions from the council? Okay, I don't see any. Looks like you covered it very well. So, okay, so if there's no questions, discussion on that, then that is our final item for our workshops this evening, and that would conclude us at this time. We will be back at 6 p.m. to begin our regularly scheduled city council meeting.